Have you ever dealt with someone so convinced of their own authority that they believe the laws of physics, property, and common decency simply bend to their will? I have. And I learned that when faced with such irrational arrogance, the best response isn't to argue, but to build a better, smarter, and far more legally sound mousetrap. My name is Frank, and this is the story of how the new president of my homeowners association tried to use a master key to invade my sanctuary and ended up calling 911 on herself, with the dispatcher, a woman I knew very well, acting as the star witness to her downfall. It all started, as these things so often do, with a piece of paper that represented a fundamental misunderstanding of the world. I'm a retired systems consultant. For 20 years, my job was to design, implement, and troubleshoot the complex digital infrastructure that makes modern counties run. I'd worked on everything from tax assessment databases to, most relevantly, the computer-aided dispatch and records management systems for our county's emergency services. I knew the protocols, the software, the legal frameworks, and the people. When I retired, I wanted the exact opposite of that world. I bought a small, secluded house on the quietest end of a pristine lake, a place surrounded by old-growth pines where the loudest sound was usually a loon's call. It was my slice of tranquility, my reward for decades spent in the digital trenches. The property was part of an HOA, but it had always been a benign entity, mostly concerned with maintaining the private road and the community boat dock. Then, Brenda was elected president. Brenda was one of those people who radiated a palpable sense of grievance, as if the world was constantly failing to meet her very specific and ever-changing standards. She had a helmet of lacquered hair, a voice that could curdle milk, and the unshakable conviction that her new title, HOA president, bestowed upon her the authority of a feudal lord. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday, nestled in my mailbox between a fishing gear catalog and a bill. It was printed on cheap, ostentatious letterhead she'd clearly designed herself, featuring a clip-art crown over the HOA's name. The letter announced a new bylaw, passed in an emergency session she had called, which required every homeowner to provide the HOA with a copy of their house key. These keys would be kept on a master ring in her possession. For emergency access and routine compliance inspections, I read it twice, a small, bitter laugh escaping my lips. Routine compliance inspections? In my private home? The sheer audacity was breathtaking. But it was the emergency access part that truly set my teeth on edge. I knew for a fact that in a true emergency, a fire, a medical crisis, the fire department had far more effective ways of getting into a house than fumbling with a key from a tin box in Brenda's sensible sedan. This wasn't about safety, it was about power. It was about her having the ability to cross any threshold, to violate any boundary, simply because she had declared it so. I knew right then I wouldn't be complying. I wasn't just going to say no. I was going to make it abundantly clear that her little fiefdom stopped at my property line. What Brenda didn't know, what she couldn't possibly comprehend, was that she wasn't just picking a fight with a quiet retiree. She was challenging a man who had helped write the very protocols she was about to so spectacularly violate. She wanted to play with emergency systems? Fine. I designed the game she was about to lose. Have you ever had to draw a line in the sand with someone like that? Let me know in the comments, because I promise you, the story of how this played out is more satisfying than you can imagine. My first response was measured, professional, and designed to give her an off-ramp. I believe in giving people a chance to retreat from a foolish position before things get truly unpleasant. I drafted a formal letter, citing specific state laws regarding landlord-tenant rights, the closest legal analogy, property rights, and the legal limitations of a homeowners association. I explained, in calm, clear language, that an HOA bylaw cannot supersede state and federal law, and that demanding unfettered access to a private dwelling without a warrant or explicit, situational permission was illegal. I pointed out the immense liability she, and by extension the entire HOA, would be taking on by holding keys to dozens of private homes. What if there was a break-in? The HOA would be the first suspect. I enclosed printouts of the relevant statutes, highlighted for her convenience, and sent the letter via certified mail. I wanted a paper trail. I wanted proof that I had attempted to resolve this reasonably. I genuinely hoped that would be the end of it. Perhaps her husband, a perpetually bewildered-looking man named Gary, would talk some sense into her. I was, of course, far too optimistic. Brenda's response came not in the mail, but in person. 2 days later, her oversized SUV crunched to a halt on the gravel of my driveway. She marched to my front door, my letter clutched in her hand like a weapon. I opened the door before she could knock, a simple tactic that often puts aggressive people off balance. "Brenda," I said, my voice neutral. "Can I help you?" She thrust the crumpled letter at my chest. This is unacceptable, Frank. This is defiance. The community is rules, and you are not exempt." Her voice was a full octave higher than a normal conversational tone. "I am not defying a legitimate rule, Brenda," I replied calmly. "I am informing you that your new rule is not legitimate. It's illegal. I've provided the legal citations for you," she scoffed, a theatrical, dismissive sound. "Lawyers and their mumbo-jumbo. This is about community safety. What if your pipes burst while you're away? It could flood the whole shoreline. I need a key." Her imagined scenarios were always dramatic, always positioning her as the hero. "If my pipes burst, my water sensors would alert me and shut off the main automatically," I said flatly. "I have my own emergency preparedness in place. It doesn't involve you having a key to my bedroom." The mention of a private space seemed to infuriate her. Her face flushed a deep, mottled red. "This is not over," she hissed. "There are fines for noncompliance. I am the president, and you will respect the position." She spun on her heel and stomped back to her car, leaving a cloud of dust and self-righteous indignation in her wake. The fine started the next week. An official-looking invoice for $50 was taped to my door, citing Bylaw 117A, noncompliance with Emergency Access Protocol. I filed it away in a folder I'd labeled Brenda. A week later, another one appeared, this time for $100, the penalty having apparently doubled. I started noticing her car driving slowly past my house, sometimes stopping at the edge of the road. I had a feeling she was watching, waiting for me to leave, perhaps fantasizing about the compliance inspection she'd conduct. The conflict was no longer a quiet, bureaucratic disagreement. It was escalating into a campaign of harassment. I spoke to a few of my neighbors. One, an elderly woman named Mrs. Gable, told me in a hushed tone that Brenda had demanded a key to her place, and she'd been too intimidated to say no. Another neighbor, a young father named Tom, told me he'd refused, and now his trash cans were being meticulously inspected every week, resulting in fines for improperly sorted recyclables. Brenda was a petty tyrant, drunk on the thimbleful of power she'd been given. This was no longer just about my key. It was about her systematic abuse of her position. My quiet retirement was being threatened, and my sense of justice, the same instinct that drove me to make complex systems fair and efficient, was fully engaged. It was time to stop reacting and start investigating. My quiet lake house had a state-of-the-art internet connection, and I had decades of experience in navigating the labyrinth of public records and online databases. It was time to see who Brenda really was. My investigation into Brenda began not with shadowy tactics, but with the mundane and publicly available breadcrumbs people leave behind in their lives. The first step was a deep dive into the HOA's own records. I requested copies of all meeting minutes and financial statements for the past 2 years. As a homeowner, it was my right. Brenda couldn't legally refuse, though the packet she eventually, grudgingly, left on my porch felt like it had been assembled with active resentment. I spent a weekend at my dining room table, a pot of coffee brewing, cross-referencing every line item. It was tedious work, but it was my native habitat. To me, a budget is a story, and this one was telling a tale of mismanagement and vanity. I found invoices from a landscaping company I'd never heard of for community beautification projects. The charges were exorbitant, yet the only visible change to our common areas was a collection of cheap, plastic flamingos arranged around the base of the HOA sign. Flamingos Brenda had proudly taken credit for at a community meeting. I did a quick business search. The landscaping company was registered to an address that, after a bit more digging, turned out to be Brenda's sister's house in the next state over. The story was getting clearer. Then there were the legal consultation fees. Substantial sums paid out to a law firm for bylaw review. I recognized the firm's name. They were a high-priced outfit specializing in corporate litigation, not humble HOA matters. It was like hiring a battleship to sink a rubber duck. No wonder she was so confident in her illegal bylaw. She was using community funds to pay for a legal sledgehammer, likely feeding the lawyers a slanted version of the facts. While I was untangling the financial threads, I also started a meticulous log of her harassment. Every fine, every slow drive-by, every passive-aggressive email she sent to the general HOA list about certain residents failing to uphold their community obligations. I took photos of the invoices taped to my door, saved screenshots of her emails, and even angled one of my existing bird-watching cameras toward the road to capture her vehicle's comings and goings. Data was everything. A single complaint is an anecdote. A documented pattern of behavior is evidence. I then turned my attention to Brenda herself. Public record searches are a powerful tool if you know how to use them. I found a string of previous addresses and, with them, a trail of small claims court cases. It seemed Brenda had a history of contentious disputes with neighbors, contractors, and even a local grocery store over a perceived slight. She was litigious and aggressive. But the most interesting discovery came from a conversation with a former HOA board member who had resigned shortly after Brenda took power. I ran into him at the local hardware store and, after some pleasantries, gently probed about his reasons for leaving the board. His name was Dave, and he was relieved to talk about it. "She's a bulldozer," he said, shaking his head. "She pushed that master key rule through in a session only she and her 2 cronies on the board attended. She called it an emergency meeting to discuss shoreline erosion, then introduced the key bylaw at the last minute. There was no legal review, not a real one anyway. She just said she'd handled it. I told her it was a massive liability, and she told me I was obstructing progress. I resigned the next day. I didn't want my name attached to the lawsuits that are bound to happen." Dave's testimony was crucial. It confirmed the procedural impropriety and her deliberate deception. The key wasn't a misguided attempt at ensuring safety. It was a premeditated power grab, rammed through with no regard for due process. My folder, initially labeled Brenda, was now overflowing. I had evidence of potential financial misconduct, a documented pattern of harassment against me and other residents, and a witness to her procedural malfeasance. The picture was complete. She wasn't just a nuisance. She was corrupt, systematically abusing her role for personal gain and to bully anyone who stood in her way. It was far worse than I had initially thought, and that's when my strategy shifted. This was no longer about defending my own privacy. It was about removing a cancer from our community, and I knew that a simple confrontation wouldn't work. A person like Brenda doesn't respond to reason or evidence presented in a civil manner. She would just scream, deny, and counterattack. To beat her, I couldn't just present the truth. I had to create a situation where the truth would be undeniable, where her own actions would become the jaws of a trap she couldn't escape. Her greatest weapon was her belief that authority would always back her up. The police, the fire department, the lawyers, she saw them as tools for her to wield. And that gave me the aha moment. The perfect stage for her downfall wasn't a stuffy HOA meeting room. It was my own front yard, with the flashing lights of the very emergency services she planned to misuse as the backdrop. I would let her make the 911 call she was so clearly itching to make, and I would be ready. The core of my strategy was based on a simple principle. Give your opponent exactly the opportunity they think they want, but on a battlefield you have prepared. Brenda wanted to play the hero, to force her way into my home under the guise of an emergency. Fine, I would give her the perfect pretense. But I would control the context, the evidence, and the narrative. My first step was to upgrade my home's security from passive to active. I replaced my standard front door lock with a high-end smart lock. It had a keypad, a fingerprint scanner, and, most importantly, a feature that logged every single interaction with it. It recorded successful entries, failed code attempts, and, this was the linchpin, any attempt to use a physical key. For every key turn, failed or successful, it would log the time and take a 1-second video clip from a pinhole camera embedded in the unit. I wanted irrefutable, time-stamped proof of her trying to enter my home. Next, I augmented my camera system. The birdwatching camera was good, but not enough. I installed 2 new, high-definition cameras with night vision and cloud storage. One was positioned to give a wide, clear view of my entire front porch and a section of the driveway. The other was placed more discreetly, looking down the property line, aimed directly at the path she always took when she did her slow, menacing drive-bys. Any footage was instantly uploaded to a secure server. If she tried to tamper with the cameras, the evidence of her doing so would already be safe. This wasn't just about catching her. It was about creating a complete, unassailable record of events. The final, and most crucial, piece of preparation involved a human element. I took a drive down to the county administration building, the very place I used to work. I had lunch with Sarah, a senior dispatcher who had been a sharp, promising rookie when I was helping them roll out their new CAD system years ago. Now, she was a shift supervisor, one of the best they had. Over sandwiches at a local deli, we caught up on old times. I didn't ask her to do anything unethical or outside of protocol. That would have been a fatal mistake. Instead, I framed it as a professional seeking advice. "Sarah," I began, "I've got a slightly unusual situation up at my place. A neighbor who has a bit of a history of, let's call it, overzealous concern. I'm worried it might escalate into her calling in a false welfare check or some other kind of emergency on my property, especially if I'm away." Sarah nodded, her expression immediately understanding. Vexatious callers were the bane of their existence. "We get those all the time," she said with a sigh. "What's the address?" I gave it to her. "What's the best way for a homeowner to preemptively flag something like that, officially?" I asked. "So your team has some context if a call does come in." She explained the procedure. A citizen can request a note be added to their address file in the system. It's a simple text flag that pops up for the dispatcher whenever the address is entered. It can't tell an officer to disregard a call, but it can provide crucial context, like homeowner travels frequently, or ongoing dispute with neighbor over property line. Advise responding officers to verify claims. "I could add a note for you right now," she offered. "What should it say?" "How about this?" I said carefully. "Homeowner, Frank Miller, has ongoing issues with a specific individual known for making vexatious complaints. If a call is received regarding this property, please advise responding units to proceed with caution and independently verify all claims on site. Mr. Miller has comprehensive remote security and automated safety systems." Sarah typed it in. "Done," she said. "That's a good, neutral note. It gives the officers a heads up without telling them how to do their job. They'll appreciate it." I thanked her profusely, and we finished our lunch. The trap was now fully set. I had the technical surveillance, the physical barrier of the new lock, the documented history of her harassment and financial misdeeds, and now, a flag planted right in the heart of the very system she intended to weaponize. All I had to do now was wait for her arrogance to do the rest of the work for me. Brenda thought she was a master of manipulation, but I had just turned the entire county dispatch system into a silent witness, waiting for her to make her move. With the stage meticulously set, all that remained was to present the bait. A person like Brenda, who thrives on control and the perception of her own importance, is most dangerous when she feels she is being ignored or, worse, mocked. My defiance was a constant irritant to her. My plan was to pour salt on that wound. I needed to create a scenario where she felt she had the perfect, unassailable opportunity to finally assert her authority. I decided to go on a trip. I started by talking about it with my neighbors. While watering my hydrangeas, I mentioned to Mrs. Gable that I was heading up north for a few days for a fishing tournament. I told Tom, the young father, that I was looking forward to getting away from all the local politics. I knew the news would get back to Brenda within hours. The neighborhood gossip network was more efficient than fiber optics. The following Saturday morning, I put on a show. I loaded my car in plain sight. A fishing rod case, a cooler, a duffel bag. I made a bit of a production of it, taking my time, making sure anyone watching would have a clear view. I even sent a deliberately cheerful email to the general HOA address, which I knew Brenda monitored like a hawk, with the subject line, "Gone fishing." The body of the email was simple. "To all, just a heads up that I'll be out of town and unreachable for the next 4 days. Hope everyone has a great weekend. Best, Frank, unreachable." That was the key word. The final piece of the puzzle for her. The homeowner is gone. He can't be contacted. And now there's a potential emergency. This was her green light. Of course, I wasn't going to any fishing tournament. I drove 10 miles down the road to a comfortable but nondescript hotel with a reliable internet connection. I checked in, opened my laptop, and brought up the live feeds from my cameras and the control panel for my smart lock. I was now a virtual watchman, a ghost in my own machine, waiting patiently. For the first day, there was nothing. Sunday was quiet too, save for one of her signature slow drive-bys in the afternoon. I watched on my screen as her SUV crept past, her silhouette visible behind the wheel. She was thinking, scheming. Then, on Monday morning, it happened. The notification from my smart lock app chimed on my phone. Failed key attempt at front door. I clicked it open. The 1-second video clip showed a clear, close-up shot of my old, now useless, key being inserted into the lock. It was unmistakably her hand, identifiable by the gaudy gold ring she always wore. She jiggled it, twisted it, and then pulled it out in frustration. The log registered the exact time, 10:17 a.m. My heart hammered in my chest, a surge of adrenaline and vindication. This was the mens rea, the proof of intent. She wasn't just investigating a smell or a sound. She was actively trying to enter my home with an unauthorized key while she believed I was away. I saved the video file to 3 different locations. For the next few hours, I watched her on the property line camera. She was pacing back and forth on the road, phone to her ear. She looked agitated, gesticulating wildly as she spoke. She was likely talking to one of her bored cronies, building her case, working herself into a righteous lather. She was convincing herself that her next action was not only justified, but necessary. The slow burn of her frustration was fascinating to watch from my detached, remote viewpoint. She felt unobserved, powerful, and thwarted all at the same time. It was a volatile combination. I settled back in my hotel chair, took a sip of lukewarm coffee, and waited for the grand finale. I knew it wouldn't be long now. She had tried the lock and failed. She had exhausted her own authority. Now, she would do what all bullies do when their personal power proves insufficient. She would appeal to a higher, more potent authority, fully expecting it to bend to her will. The call to 911 was coming, and my entire system was ready and waiting to catch it. Brenda's internal monologue, as I later pieced it together from the fallout, was a swirling vortex of righteous indignation. She truly believed I was not just defying her, but mocking the very concept of community order that she embodied. The useless key in her hand wasn't just a piece of metal, it was a symbol of my insolence. The locked door was a personal affront. Pacing on the hot asphalt of the road, she convinced herself that my absence and the jammed lock were deeply suspicious. What was I hiding? Was there some unpermitted construction happening inside? A slow water leak that would destabilize the whole shoreline, just as she predicted? Her mind, fertile ground for worst-case scenarios that always starred her as the savior, landed on the most dramatic and unimpeachable excuse, the smell of gas. It was perfect. No one questions a potential gas leak. It's an immediate, high-stakes emergency that demands action. It would force the fire department to come, and they would have to get inside. Once the door was open, she, as the responsible HOA president on the scene, could finally conduct her long-overdue compliance inspection. Her plan felt foolproof. From her perspective, the sequence was simple. She would call 911, report the odor, and the authorities would arrive and defer to her as the on-site representative of the community. They would open the door, and she would be vindicated. She retreated to her own porch, phone in hand, rehearsing her lines to sound concerned, not vindictive. She took a deep breath, composed her features into a mask of civic worry, and dialed the 3 numbers that she believed would deliver her victory. Back in my hotel room, I wasn't watching the cameras anymore. I was monitoring the county's Public Emergency Services CAD feed, a system I could access online. It wasn't real-time to the second, but it updated every 60 seconds. At 2:42 p.m., the entry popped up. Structure/gas odor. Exterior, it read, followed by my address. Below it were the unit assignments. Engine 4, Squad 2, Patrol Car 11. My pulse quickened. It's one thing to plan for an event, to lay a trap. It's another to see the gears begin to turn, to know that the confrontation you've engineered is now just minutes away. I closed my laptop, grabbed my keys, and walked calmly out of the hotel. I wasn't rushing. My timing had to be perfect. I wanted to arrive not before them, and not long after, but at the precise moment when the situation was at its peak of confusion and Brenda was at the height of her performance. The 10-mile drive back to my house was surreal. I felt strangely calm, the way I used to feel before a major system deployment. I had checked every variable, run every diagnostic. The plan was sound. All that was left was the execution. As I turned onto my private road, I could see them. The flashing lights of the fire engine and the police cruiser painted strobing patterns on the pine trees. It was a shocking amount of official hardware for a quiet Monday afternoon. The site was designed to intimidate, and for any other homeowner, it would have. But for me, it looked like victory. Brenda was there, of course, front and center. She was standing with a police officer and a man I recognized as the battalion chief, his white helmet denoting his rank. She was in full dramatic flow, one hand on her chest, the other pointing toward my house. I was just walking by, she was saying, her voice thick with feigned panic, and I smelled it so clearly. A rotten egg smell. I know he's out of town, and I was so worried. I tried my emergency key, a copy the HOA requires for situations just like this, but the lock seems to be broken. Thank God you're here. The officer, a young man with a serious expression, nodded. Okay, ma'am. We'll check it out. I pulled my car into my driveway, parking it neatly behind the police cruiser, and got out. My arrival was quiet, deliberate. All three of them turned to look at me. Brenda's jaw literally dropped. The carefully constructed mask of concern dissolved into pure, unfiltered shock. Frank, she sputtered, her voice losing all its theatricality. You're supposed to be in Michigan. I finished for her, a small, tight smile on my face. Change of plans. What seems to be the problem, officer? The trap was now sprung. All the actors were on stage, the audience of first responders was assembled, and the chief architect of the drama had just lost control of the script. The young police officer looked from me to Brenda, his expression shifting from routine diligence to cautious curiosity. This was no longer a simple welfare check. It was a situation with unexpected variables. Sir, are you the homeowner at this address? He asked, his hand resting near his notepad. I am, I confirmed calmly. Frank Miller. And you are? Officer Evans. We received a call about a possible gas leak at your residence. The caller stated you were out of town and a key she had for emergencies wouldn't work. He gestured toward Brenda, who was now staring at me with a look of pure venom, her panicked neighbor act in tatters. A gas leak, I said, feigning mild surprise. I walked toward my front door, the fire chief and Officer Evans following. I made a show of sniffing the air dramatically. I don't smell anything. Chief, do you or your men detect any gas? The battalion chief, a burly man with a weathered face, shook his head. None. My guys just did a full sweep of the exterior with our detectors. 0 readings. We were about to discuss forcing entry when you arrived. I see, I said, turning my gaze to Brenda. Brenda, you told them you smelled gas? She folded her arms, her face flushing. I did. It must have dissipated. It was very strong a few minutes ago. It was a weak recovery, and we all knew it. Officer Evans was now looking at her with undisguised suspicion. He spoke into the radio on his shoulder. Dispatch, this is Unit 11. I'm on scene at the Miller residence. The homeowner is present. Be advised, the report of a gas leak appears to be unfounded at this time. This was the moment I had been waiting for. Sarah's voice, professional and clear, came back through the speaker, audible to all of us in the quiet afternoon air. Copy that, Unit 11. Just for your information, be advised that the address at your location has a note on file. There was a brief pause. I watched Brenda's face. She didn't understand what was happening, but she could sense the tide turning against her. Sarah continued, her voice a model of dispassionate protocol. The note indicates the homeowner, Mr. Frank Miller, has had ongoing issues with a neighbor regarding vexatious complaints. It advises responding units to independently verify all claims on site. The note also states the homeowner has comprehensive remote security and automated safety systems. The fire chief's head snapped toward Brenda. Officer Evans jotted something down in his notepad, his eyes never leaving her. The official, recorded voice from the dispatch center had just validated my entire position and labeled her, in polite but unmistakable terms, a troublemaker. The air crackled with a new tension. Brenda was no longer the concerned citizen. She was the subject of a dispatch advisory. Her face went from red to a pale, clammy white. "Vexatious complaints," she stammered, looking at the officer. "That's slander. He's a liar." I ignored her outburst and turned to Officer Evans. "Officer, I can assure you there is no emergency. In fact, I believe a serious offense may have been committed here. Filing a false report and intentionally misusing emergency services is a crime, is it not? You have a fire engine and 2 emergency squads here, lights flashing, for a gas leak that never existed. What if there had been a real fire on the other side of the county?" The fire chief's expression darkened considerably. He was now looking at Brenda not just as a civilian, but as someone who had wasted his time and put public safety at risk. The authority she had tried to borrow was now turning its full, formidable attention on her. She had walked onto my stage, and the spotlight I had prepared was now shining directly on her, revealing everything. I let the weight of the chief's glare and the officer's silence press down on Brenda. Her blustering facade was crumbling with every passing second, revealing the petty panic beneath. This was the moment to present the evidence, to methodically dismantle her story piece by piece, leaving no room for denial or misinterpretation. "Officer Evans," I began, my tone calm and factual, "the story about the emergency key is particularly interesting. Mrs. Jackson here," I nodded toward Brenda, using her formal name to create distance, "has been harassing me for months to gain access to my home. I refused, citing my legal right to privacy. She then manufactured an illegal HOA bylaw to try and force the issue, which I also refused to comply with." I paused, letting that sink in. "For my own security and peace of mind, I changed the locks on my home 3 weeks ago. The key she has is for the old lock." "It's useless," Brenda sputtered. "That's not true. The lock is jammed." I was worried. "Is it?" I said, turning to my front door. "Let's see." I entered the code into the keypad of the smart lock. It beeped softly, and the deadbolt slid open with a satisfying click. I pushed the door open an inch. As you can see, the lock works perfectly. There is no gas leak. My home is secure. I then turned back to the officer, pulling out my smartphone. "The reason her key didn't work isn't because the lock is jammed. It's because it's the wrong key. And more importantly, I have proof that her attempt to enter my home today was not a panicked response to an emergency. It was a premeditated act." I opened the security app and played the video from that morning. The screen clearly showed Brenda's hand, her distinctive ring glinting in the sunlight, inserting the old key into the lock and trying to force it. The timestamp was clearly visible, 10:17 a.m., more than 4 hours before her 911 call. "This was this morning," I explained to Officer Evans, holding the phone so he and the chief could see. "Long before any supposed gas leak. This is an explicit attempt to gain unauthorized entry to my home. When this failed, she waited several hours and then concocted the gas leak story as a pretext to have your departments breach my door for her." The fire chief let out a low whistle. He had seen it all. Officer Evans looked at Brenda, his expression now hard as granite. "Ma'am, is this true? Did you attempt to enter this house this morning?" Brenda stared at the phone screen, her mouth opening and closing silently. She was trapped. The digital evidence was irrefutable. Her denials collapsed into a stream of incoherent muttering. You don't understand. He's been so difficult." The rules, her appeal to the rules, now sounded pathetic and desperate. The officer cut her off. "Ma'am, I need a straight answer. Did you call 911 to report a gas leak you knew to be false?" Her eyes darted around, looking for an escape, an ally. But there were none. The firemen were watching her with contempt. The neighbors who had slowly gathered at the edge of their lawns were whispering amongst themselves. Her authority had evaporated. All that was left was a woman who had been caught in a foolish, dangerous lie. Filing a false report that initiates a full emergency response is a gross misdemeanor in this state, Officer Evans said, his voice cold and official. It carries significant fines and potential jail time. You diverted city and county resources, including a fire engine and a medical squad, from being available for actual emergencies. At this point, I am no longer investigating a gas leak. I am investigating you. He took out his handcuffs. Brenda looked at the steel cuffs, and something inside her finally broke. A high-pitched, wailing sob escaped her lips. The HOA president, the self-appointed guardian of community standards, was about to be put in the back of a police car in front of the very people she had tried so desperately to rule. Her public humiliation was absolute, and it was a direct result of her own arrogance. The aftermath of Brenda's spectacular implosion was as swift as it was decisive. Officer Evans didn't end up cuffing her on the spot. A small mercy, perhaps, but he did formally detain her for questioning and issued her a citation that required a court appearance. The charge was serious, filing a false police report leading to an emergency response. The image of her, defeated and weeping as she was guided into the back of the patrol car, was seared into the memory of every neighbor who witnessed it. The fire engine and ambulance packed up and left, their crews shaking their heads, their quiet professionalism a stark contrast to Brenda's chaotic drama. Once they were gone, an unnerving quiet fell over the street. My neighbors, who had been watching from a safe distance, slowly began to emerge. Tom, the young father she'd hassled over his recycling, came over first. "Frank," he said, a look of awe on his face. "That was incredible. I had no idea you could even do that." Mrs. Gable followed, patting my arm. "Thank you, dear," she whispered. "She frightened me terribly. I gave her my key last month because I didn't know what else to do. I assured her I'd help her get it back." The incident acted as a catalyst, breaking the spell of fear Brenda had cast over the community. Her authority wasn't just challenged, it was annihilated. That evening, my phone began to ring. It was Dave, the former board member, followed by 3 others. They wanted to call an emergency HOA meeting, a real one this time. They needed to address the Brenda situation immediately. They asked if I would be willing to present my findings. I agreed. The meeting was held 2 days later in the small community clubhouse. It was packed. For the first time in over a year, nearly every homeowner was in attendance. Brenda was there, stony-faced and accompanied by her bewildered-looking husband, Gary. She was clearly there on the advice of a lawyer, to show she was still engaged. But her presence only made things worse for her. I stood at the front of the room, not with anger, but with a calm, organized presentation. I laid out everything, using a small projector I'd brought. I showed the timeline of her harassment. I presented the financial statements, highlighting the questionable payments to her sister's landscaping company and the exorbitant legal fees. I explained the procedurally improper way the master key bylaw had been passed. I didn't need to be dramatic. The facts themselves were damning. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment, then erupted. People started sharing their own stories of Brenda's petty fines, her threats, her invasive inspections. The dam of intimidation had broken, and a flood of grievances poured out. A motion was made to immediately remove Brenda from her position as president and from the board. It passed with a nearly unanimous vote. Only she and Gary voted against it. A second motion, proposed by Dave, was to hire an independent forensic accountant to conduct a full audit of the HOA's finances for the duration of Brenda's presidency. That also passed unanimously. The final motion was to immediately and permanently rescind Bylaw 117A, the master key rule. As the residents voted yes with a resounding aye, I saw Brenda flinch. It was the end of her reign. The legal consequences for Brenda mounted. Her court appearance for the false 911 call resulted in a hefty fine and a year of probation. But the forensic audit was the real killer. It uncovered clear evidence of embezzlement, showing she had funneled nearly $20,000 of HOA funds to herself through the fake landscaping company. Faced with criminal charges for theft, she and Gary were forced to sell their house to pay for a lawyer and make restitution to the HOA. Within 6 months, they were gone. The new board, led by the sensible Dave, immediately went to work restoring fairness and transparency. The ridiculous rules were purged, the budget was made public and easy to understand, and a new sense of neighborly cooperation returned. My little lake house was finally the sanctuary I had always wanted it to be. I had my peace and quiet back. Looking back, the lesson is clear. Bullies like Brenda thrive in ambiguity and feed on the fear that it's easier to comply than to fight. They count on you not knowing the rules, not understanding the system. But knowledge is power. By understanding the system she sought to misuse, from HOA bylaws to 911 dispatch protocols, I was able to turn her own weapon against her. I didn't shout or rage. I researched, planned, and executed a strategy. Justice doesn't always come loudly. Sometimes it arrives quietly in the form of a well-placed note in a database, a time-stamped video clip, and the calm, clear voice of a dispatcher doing her job by the book. So, if you ever find yourself facing a tyrant, big or small, remember this. Don't just get angry. Get smart. Learn the system, find the leverage points, and build your own, better mousetrap. They will eventually walk right into it.